Story 1. The Stars of Big Face Marsh. It was cold, cold and dark. That's all I could feel when I stared into the black abyss that made up its eyes. There was a tingling sensation in my feet that slowly rose up in my body like panic trap inside of me. I felt changed. I don't know what he was doing to me, but it freaked he out. My heart started pounding, but that was the only part of my body that moved. I couldn't blink. I couldn't even breathe. All I could do was stare into those big black eyes, those big, beautiful eyes, like a night sky full of breathtaking stars. But these stars were moving slowly but surely, not just moving, spinning. It was mesmerizing. It was hypnotizing. It was beautiful. He was beautiful. I wanted to thank him for these stars. They were the most beautiful things I had ever laid my eyes upon. I wanted to praise him. I wanted to worship him. And then, like a warm embrace, my body was relieved of the coldness, and I gained the ability to move again. He'd released me and disappeared, but I knew what to do. I must worship him. I must be like him. With the starry night image still in mind, I slowly reached for my pocket knife. I went for my eyes first. They'd already seen the best thing they'd ever see. So why bother with all these inferior sights? I didn't need them anymore. The beautiful vision would forever be in my memories anyway. With the stars still in mind, I brought my knife to my eyes. First the left, then the right, forever blending myself from my unworthy surroundings. There, I could finally see my stars, nothing but the stars. With a pleased smile, I sat down and brought the knife to my legs, slowly peeling both the skin and the flesh away, leaving nothing but the bone. It took ages, but I knew it would be worth it. I would be beautiful, beautiful like him. Beautiful like Big Face. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Chicken, Dan taunted. It's just a forest where people go missing. Brick grunted in return. Normally he'd be up for a camping trip, but recently the walls in the city had been decorated with pictures of people who'd gone missing. You don't know if the forest is where people go missing, Dan added. No one knows what's happened. That is, unless you're scared of Big Face. Brick shoved Dan hard. You know I'm not superstitious, he yelled at him, but Dan only laughed. Oh, he's real, he taunted. I've seen him himself. Brick glared at him. You're lying. You wouldn't be alive if you'd seen him, he shouted. You sure know a lot about someone you claim doesn't exist. Dan continued. You sure it's not because you're a chicken? I'm not a chicken. Brick yelled again. Dan smirked. Then prove it. Fine. We'll go on your stupid camping trip, Brick answered, trying his hardest not to stutter. Deal? I'll see you on Saturday, 3 p.m. in front of the forest, Dan instructed. Deal, I'll see you. Brick agreed, and the two boys parted ways. Walking home, Brick felt terrified already, but he didn't want to be a chicken. It was just stupid superstition. After all, most towns had their own tales, right? Brick laughed to himself, feeling a tad bit braver. Surely none of them sounded as silly as Big Face F. For a while, Brick started to wonder why he'd even be scared in the first place. He snorted, a massive floating head. Surely whoever came up with the tale must have been drunk. What would a floating head even do? Headbutt you to death, Brick laughed. No, Big Face was definitely just a myth, a silly myth indeed. When Brick came home, he threw himself on the sofa and turned on his PlayStation. He knew his mother would be against it, but what she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. He played for what seemed like hours, until he suddenly heard a car pull up. Shit, he thought to himself, and quickly turned everything off, running upstairs, and only just made it before he heard the front door unlock. He pulled the first book he could reach out of his bag and turned to a random page, pretending to be deep into homework. After a few minutes, he heard a knock on his door and looked up to see his mother peeking into his room. They started some small talk about Brick's day at school, and eventually Brick asked his mom if he could spend the night at Don's place on Saturday. His mother smiled at him, pleased he was finally getting along with someone. "Sure, honey," she replied. "Do you want a ride there?" Brick rejected her offer, knowing he couldn't tell her where he was really going. He deemed it better to go by bike. He knew and would bring a tent. Don's parents were never home, and notice what Dan was doing anyway. Brick sighed, wishing he was as lucky as Dan. Brick would be 12 in a few months, but his mother insisted on treating him as if he was 7, and surely she never let him stay the night in the forest. But she didn't need to know that's where he was going. "Thanks for letting me go, Mom," Brick murmured, returning to his pretend homework. His mother smiled and returned before heading downstairs to cook dinner. Brick sighed with relief, though a part of him wished she wouldn't have agreed to the sleepover. The confidence from earlier was gone, and he was definitely terrified again. That night, Brick barely slept. Whenever he closed his eyes, he'd see floating faces grinning at him. One of the nightmares was him rushing through the forest with a massive face chasing him, and its horrifying laughter echoing in the woods. Brick's eyes flew open, and he breathed heavily for a while. Eventually, he rolled onto his side, attempting to fall asleep again, and there, on his extra pillow, laid a big mask, grinning at him. Brick was up in an instant. Drenched in sweat and breathing heavily, he looked around frantically to ensure he was awake for real this time. After rubbing his eyes for what seemed like minutes, he finally checked his alarm. Still 3 hours of sleep left. Brick sighed, wishing this terrible night would just end. The nightmares continued playing out for the rest of the night, and Brick was still tired when his alarm rang. However, he didn't want to go back to SL Heap, though he definitely wanted to stay at home. He couldn't have Dan calling him a chicken in front of everyone at school. So he got out of bed and started getting ready. Brick barely had any breakfast and made sure to hide the food he threw out well in the garbage so his mom wouldn't notice. He spent the rest of his time packing his backpack before he yelled goodbye to his mother and ventured out on his bike. Brick's heart was pounding as he cycled, and he knew it wasn't from exhaustion, judging by the slow tempo he kept. All the way there, Brick kept telling himself to relax and calm down. Big Face wasn't real. He and Anne would be just fine. They'd have fun camping in the woods. The only thing they'd find in there would be the trees and animals, Brick thought. Normal animals, big floating heads weren't real, and Brick and Dan would prove that. Brick would never let Dan know he was scared. puffing out his chest a bit. He finally pulled up to the fore, asked where Dan was waiting for him. The boys spent most of their time setting up their tent and collecting wood for a fire. When everything was finally ready, the sun had set. The boys sat around the fire, keeping warm. Brick was happy they'd lit the fire before it had gone dark. The fire provided enough light and warmth for the boys to stay up for a bit, though fear was starting to sneak you on Brick. The noises in the forest started to get on Brick's nerves, and even the slightest sound made him twitch a little. Brick moved closer to the fire to pretend his slight shivering was from being cold. Suddenly, Brick heard a loud snap that made him jump. Out of fear, he turned around to see where the noise came from, and he found Dan laughing out loud while holding both ends of the stick he broke. "Dude, you should have seen your face." Dan laughed. "Your reaction was priceless." "That's not funny," Brick shouted, standing up to confront him. Dan stopped laughing. Good, Brick thought. It seemed he had some effect on Dan after all. He'd show him not to mess with him like that. He'd show him he wasn't a chicken. "Don't you have anything better to do than joke around all day? When will you actually start taking things seriously?" Brick growled angrily, looking down at Dan, but Dan wasn't looking at Brick. Dan was looking at something behind Brick. "What? Cat's got your tongue," Brick continued angrily, but Dan only pointed at something behind Brick. "Yeah, I'm not falling for your tricks," Brick snorted. It wasn't until Dan's eyes got wide with fear and his pointing more desperate that Brick finally turned around, and there, a few yards away, Brick saw something move. It had a human-like silhouette, but there was something off about the way it moved. As it got closer, Brick noticed how thin the person was. They must have been lost and not eaten for days, Brick thought to himself. The boys just kept staring at it, and eventually Brick realized the reason behind the thin appearance. Surely the creature was human, or at least it used to be. The person's body was literally just bones, but what really scared the boys was the face. The entire body was missing its skin and flesh, but the face was intact. However, the area around the eyes was covered with dried blood, and the eyes appeared to have been slashed. Brick stared long enough at the morbid face to realize this person was one of the missing people from the posters he'd seen. Feeling sick and terrified, he turned to Dan so they could run, but Dan was being held by another walking skeleton, its face just as terrifying as the first one. Another missing person, Brick assumed. He took a step back in fear and started to look around for a means of escape, but wherever he looked, he only saw more and more skeletons appearing. Brick didn't know what to do. He couldn't leave Dan, and he couldn't spot any way out. Eventually, he saw something else coming out from between the trees, something bigger. Brick froze in place, completely unable to move. Now both he and Dan were forced to look at the creature emerging from the forest. Brick started to feel a tingling sensation rising up from his feet, and he soon realized the creature was little more than a face. "Big face," he thought to himself, and despite their risk and panic, Brick and Dan remained rooted in place as Big Face floated closer. At the same time, the walking skeletons began gathering behind the bars. also staring at Big Face. It wasn't until the enormous bulbous head of the creature was before the boys that Breck noticed its eyes, its big black eyes, its big, beautiful black eyes, full of stars. Both Breck and Dan C. continued staring into the eyes until Big Face eventually disappeared. The skeletons let go of Dan and started to leave as well. Both Brick and Dan dropped to their knees, searching for rocks, but not just any row. CKS, they needed sharp rocks, rocks that were sharp enough to cut. Big Face had shown them the stars, and they were prepared to do whatever it took to see them again. They needed to worship him, to be like him. They needed to be beautiful. Story 2. Pass it on. It's quite an interesting concept. Those little pass it on messages, I mean. Chain letters and people telly. NGU post this in 5 different comments or else you'll die tonight. Interesting indeed, but the idea lacks originality. It's the same story with each one. Pass it on or die, people. Pass it on. And they go on living. A happy ending for everyone. But what if there was a little twist? Let's say that there's a photo out there. It's not one of those can be found anywhere else type of pictures. It's actually really easy to find. Just use your chosen search engine and type in black and white photo of twins. You should be presented with a variety of different CK and white photos of twins. But let me help and tell you what to look for. You're looking for a picture of the twin girls wearing black dresses and white headbands. The twin on the left has a straight face while the one on the right is smiling. Found it. Good. Now, as you'll see, there's nothing particularly unnerving about the photo. It may be a little creepy, but other than that it looks as normal as any other picture you've ever come across. Now, here's the twist. If you do pass it on, you die. Now, I know most of you, given this particular set of choices, would choose to leave either picture be. But allow me to elaborate upon what happens when you don't pass this picture on to someone else. If you leave it alone after seeing it, you'll have nightmares. I know. Bad dreams don't sound so bad when compared to the alternative. But trust me, it gets worse. It all begins with something simple. Before long, you'll see the twins standing side by side in the darkness. The girl on the left will leave, and you'll be left alone with her smiling twin. And just before you wake up, she whisper, pass it on, and her smile will widen ever so slightly. I know, it doesn't sound like much of a nightmare. The first of many. It's fairly subtle, but with each successive nightmare, things began to change. Gradually, the smiling girl gets closer and closer to you. Will he? Her smile widens to impossible lengths. You won't be able to help but feel greatly disturbed and unsafe when it happens. Don't worry, that's normal. What's next? However, not so much. You'll try to wake yourself up. You'll try to move, but nothing will work. You'll find yourself trapped. She bring out various instruments, a knife, chains, gasoline, matches, many devices to make you feel uneasy. Then you panic. You can't help but think of all the horrible things this twisted, sadistic child has in store for you. And does she ever have some horrible things in store for you? Let's take a moment to think about the possibilities. What do you think she'd do to you? Wrap the chains around your head and pull until your skull splits, gouge out your eyes, cut out your tongue, slice off your ears, burn you alive knowing that you can't move. That and more, my dear. You take the term unimaginable torture too lightly until you fall asleep. If you think she lash you with chains, she do so only after she's laid them in fire and stuck railroad spikes in your back. If you think she burn you, she lines tear open your torso, pour gasoline into the wound, and then light the match. You'll wake up screaming. Your body will remember the pain it's endured while you quiver in fear. Every time you wake up, you lines notice subtle differences about your body, a bruise here, a scratch there, but as each nightmare gradually gets worse, so do the marks which shall be left behind. Before long the scratches will become F.R.-ish bloody scars. If you dreamt that you took a sledgehammer to the knee, you'll wake and rise, only to find your legs buckling below you as pain surges through your kneecaps. All the while, her words linger in the back of your mind. You'll try to avoid sleeping, but it's no use. The twins make their way into your reality. They're always there, at your home, at your place of work, or at school. You would fight back, but their visage appears in place of the faces of your loved ones. Eventually, you'll hide yourself away from everyone in an effort to avoid seeing these demonic children. It's all in vain. However, you'll see them in that millisecond of darkness when you blink. You'll see them in reflections and in your peripheral vision. You'll see them everywhere. You can't escape. You can consider suicide, even attempt it, but they won't let you go so easily. That shotgun that you've got hidden in the closet, the revolver in the nightstand, and useless. How strange. They seem to be jammed, or missing a trigger. A cocktail of cold and flu and pain medications won't help either. It's so very odd, indeed, how you just can't seem to hold them down long enough for them to take effect. Soon enough, you won't be able to distinguish your dreams from reality. You'll awake from one torturous experience only to be greeted by alternative horrors without realizing it. You've given the twins a new playmate. And do they ever like to play? Well, at least one does. While one plays with you, the other will stand there watching, chanting, pass it on over, hand over again, all the while ignoring your cries for help. There's no happy ending to be had should you remain optimistic. I'm afraid you are just as naive as those who came before you, and there were many, oh so many, and you won't be the last. I've made certain of that. Now, you have a decision to make. Now that you've seen the picture and discovered the consequences, whatever shall you do? Might you leave the picture be and pray that this was just some twisted story, or will you decide to pass it on? Story 3, The Dang Heirs of Fame. I awoke to the sun shining through the slit in the curtains and an odd feeling. When I sat up, I was struck with confusion when I saw my surroundings. This wasn't my house. How did I end up passed out on the floor in someone else's home? Okay, think. What happened last night? I said, rubbing my head in what seemed like a futile effort to make the memory return. Then something clicked. The party, my friends and colleagues held a party in celebration of another successful book completed. Did I really drink that much? No, it wasn't that. I knew what a hangover felt like. And this feeling I had wasn't that. Something didn't feel right. I didn't feel right. It was as if something was missing, but I just couldn't put my finger on it. I went to stand up, but froze at what I saw next. I saw blood that smeared and stained the hardwood floor. I jolted to my feet and searched my body for any cuts or scars. I found nothing. If I wasn't Theo, any who had been hurt, then that meant that someone else was here with me, possibly bleeding to death. I shoved my hands in my pockets, rummaging around for my phone so that I could call for help, searching my pockets for the phone lead to no avail. I looked around the room once more to see if there was a phone that I could use. I saw nothing. I explored my unfamiliar environment only to find that there were no phones whatsoever in this house. Maybe if I went outside and found the neighbor, they could help. I looked outside and saw that I was in the middle of nowhere. I had no neighbors to call upon. This was bad. I had to find the other person and get out of there fast. I looked everywhere, opening door after door. I looked in bedrooms, bathrooms, upstairs. I called out to the person, hoping that they would yell back and I could pinpoint their location. I heard nothing. Suddenly, out of the nothing, I heard a truck pull up outside. I ran down the hall in a panic. I came face to face with yet another door. It was open, though, and I could only assume that, at the time, it led to the basement. I heard footsteps making their way to the front door. I entered and quickly made my way into the darkness. I tried to be as careful as I possibly could while descending the steps into the pitch-black basement. As soon as my foot touched the floor, I heard the door upstairs open, then slammed shut. "Honey, I'm home, and I've got a surprise for you," he shouted as I heard footsteps making their way to the basement. I stumbled around, trying to find a place to hide or something to hit him over the head with. Just then, I tripped over something. I hit the ground, then started feeling around to see if I could figure out what it was. I grabbed of someone's foot. For a split second, I was relieved to have found the other person. It was still kind of dark, so I couldn't really see much, but I was able to make out the shape of a girl sitting in a chair. "Don't worry," I whispered. "We'll get out of here soon." Our captor was at the threshold of the basement. I turned around, looking for a place to hide. Something caught my eye. I saw the tools that were sprawled out on top of a table, glistening in what little light had filled the room. I scurried under the table and pressed myself tightly up against the Washington lines. I saw a bat leaning against the side of the table. When he wasn't paying attention, that's when I'd make my move and get both of us out of here. He turned on the light. When he hit the bottom step, the captor came into view. Well, the bottom half of him anyway. He was wearing dress shoes and a tux. I saw the girl a little more clearly now. She was covered with scars. Her skin was a sickening tint of white from the amount of blood that she lost. Isn't it beautiful? Well, it's not nearly as beautiful as you are, though. The unknown man draped a silky white dress over the girl and got down on one knee. The edge of the table was just barely covering his face. He took her hand and slid a ring on her finger. The way her arm dropped to her side reminded me of a rag doll. I wondered how she could be so calm and so still in this situation. That's when I realized the grim fact that she was dead. I let out a gasp, then quickly covered my mouth in an FORT to stop the noise. The man didn't seem notice. "You've made me a very happy man, you know that. I mean, we've had our moments, but I never stopped believing that we will." DB together someday. I listened closely to him. He sounded very familiar. Did I actually know this psycho from somewhere? He stood up and made his way toward the table. I slowly extended my hand towards the bat. He shuffled through his tools for a second and finally found what he was looking for. A book dropped to his side. My book. He turned around, gave the corpse a kiss on the cheek, and made his way toward the stairs. Now was my chance. I gripped the bat and shot out from under the table. When I was right behind him, I closed my eyes and swung as hard as I could. After a moment I opened my eyes and saw him standing not 3 inches from my face. I jolted back and fell. I closed my eyes again and started frantically swinging. Get the hell away from me. I kept waving the bat around, hoping that when I opened my eyes again, he would be laying face down. I stopped for a second and hesitantly opened my eyes. He was still standing, looking straight ahead at the body and chair. How was he still standing? How could he not have noticed me screaming and hitting him with a bat? "I'll let you get ready," he said before turning around and making his way up the stairs. After seeing his face, it hit me. He was at the party. I could have sworn that I saw him at the party. He was one of the waiters. He brought me my drink. Then the rest is kind of fuzzy, but I vaguely recall him carrying me out to the truck. Then I was here, and he took the bat and the bat. I got ready to swing again, only to find that I wasn't holding it. I looked back at the table, and there it was, propped up against the side, but I could have sworn that I had grabbed it. What the hell was going on? Then I saw something that explained why I couldn't grab the bat, and the feeling that I had earlier, that feeling that something was missing. I soon realized that what was missing was a heartbeat. When I saw my body sitting in the chair with the forehead shed in. Story 4. Colwyn's Corner. I usually like to watch TV with my little sister, Kimberly. She was only 5, so of course she watched all the cutesy kids shows. I didn't really mind, though they made her happy, and I liked spending time with her. She watched shows like Dora, Blue's Clues, and Arthur. We often had a lot of DVDs of old kid shows around the house that we would watch. There was a large box of old movies and TV shows in the attic. I took a brief look at it once, but none of them looked like they would appeal to her. One day, Kimberly was at a doctor's appointment, and I thought I'd have time to watch a movie aimed more towards my age range. So I thought this would be a good time to look through the box of old movies in the attic. While I looked through the box, I noticed that these movies didn't really interest me, but I kept looking in hopes to find something. Then I saw at the bottom of the box a DVD labeled Colwyn's Corner. Many memories started to come back to me. I used to watch this show as a kid. It was about an orange puppet named Colwyn, who lived in a house on the corner of a street. He would often have his other puppet friends come over to play games and sing songs. It was cute and innocent, and I remember really liking it as a kid. I thought this would be a good show for my sister and I to watch. When Kimberly got home, I told her I got a new show for us to watch. She got excited and sat down on the couch while I put the disc in. I sat down next to her as the selection screen popped up. The screen looked just as I remembered it. It showed Colwyn and his friends in front of the house. I chose the first episode, and the theme song began. I was a little confused. The colors were a lot darker than I remember, and the song was sung a lot slower and in a deeper voice. I didn't think much of it, as I hadn't seen the show in a long time, and I probably forgot some elements of it. The show began pretty normally. Colwyn was in his house and said hello to the viewers. There was a knock on his door, and he said, "I think my friends are here." When he opened the door, I felt my hair tee to my throat. Standing at the door were two tall, white puppets with no nose or mouth, only pitch black eyes. I was shocked because I don't even remember these characters on the show. Even the cover of the DVD showed two colorful, friendly puppets I looked over at Kimberly, and she had this big smile on her face. I was confused, since an image like that would terrify a child. "I'm not sure if we should watch this anymore," I told her. "No, please. Keep it on," she exclaimed. I continued watching, as the giant puppets didn't seem to faze her. The two large puppets came into the house. Colwyn asked, "What do you guys want to do today?" The one puppet replied with the most horrific sound I ever heard. It sounded like a man was shouting, almost screaming in a strange language. The audio was very distorted. At this point, I got up and ejected the disc from the VCR, much to Kimberly's disappointment. "Why did you stop it?" "Put it back on." She said. I didn't listen and put the DVD in a drawer. Even though Kimberly wasn't bothered by the show, I still thought it was too disturbing for a 5-year-old. I had trouble sleeping that night. I kept thinking about the video. I watched that show all the time when I was younger. I definitely have seen every episode. I didn't understand why I didn't remember an episode like this. I was still curious about the rest of the episode. I decided to go downstairs to finish it. I took the DVD out of the drawer and put it in the VCR. I put on headphones so the noise wouldn't disturb my family. The episode began the same, with the strong J intro and the large puppets. After the one puppet made the terrifying sound, Colwyn replied, "You're right. We should play a game." He then grabbed a knife off the counter. It cut to a live-action arm painted orange to represent Colwyn's. The knife went up to the arm and started to cut slits, each one deeper than the last. Colwyn started to scream a blood-curdling scream. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I felt sick to my stomach. Blood gushed out of the wounds as the screams got louder and louder. It then cut to a live-action neck painted orange. The knife went up to the throat and cut a deep slit in it, and blood began gushing out. It showed Colwyn gasping heavily for air before his eyes turned completely white. The episode ended with him falling to the ground as the two tall white puppets looked directly into the camera with pitch-black eyes. I was utterly terrified at this point. I immediately ejected the DVD and threw it in the trash. I couldn't sleep at all that night. I kept thinking about the episode. I got up the next morning and went downstairs to get some breakfast. I walked past Kimberly's room and saw that she wasn't in there. When I got downstairs, I saw her on the couch, finishing up the horrific episode I watched last night. I immediately grabbed the remote and turned the TV off. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Where did you get the DVD?" I shouted. "It was in the garbage," she replied. "I took it out because I wanted to finish the episode. This show is very bad, I shouted. No, it's not, she said. They were just baking a cake. What? I said. The episode was about Colwyn and his friends baking a cake, she replied. I was shocked. What did his friends look like? I asked. One was blue and one was red, she replied. I really liked it. Can I watch it again? Story 5, News from the Front. Awash with terror, I lay in bed, jumping and flinching at every creak. The old country house had always made such noises at night. The beams would creak, the windows would knock, and the wind would howl down the fireplace. I had not always been so afraid of these sounds, but then again I had not always been alone. My husband and I moved to this village 5 years ago. We had just married, and the house was just right for us. I admit it was a bit weather-worn, but my husband Paul could afford it, and there was a job available as the village postmaster. He bought the house, took the job, and we were happy. Oh, so happy here the wind could scream bloody murder, and the house itself could shake. But with Paul here, I feared nothing. That though was before the war, before enlistment, before our men were set to fight, fester, and die in those god-awful trenches in France. So I lay alone on a cold, windy night, both scared of the unearthly things that could be upon me in the unsettled house, and scared of the all-too-earthly dangers facing my husband far across the channel. Context, it is a strange thing. Some things within a certain context can be dull and boring, warranting no thought or attention, though in a different context the same thing, nose, in this case, can be terrifying. The nose I heard that night would be, in the right context, so very dull, but in bed alone in my old house. This sound scared me to my very bones. Someone had just unlocked the front door and was walking towards the stairs. I lost feeling in my feet. My hands tingled with pins and needles, and my mouth went deathly dry as I listened to the heavy boots trudge across the floorboards, approaching the stairs. My stomach churned as if it was attempting to physically expel this newly tangible, poisonous fear from my body. I did not have time to react further as the boots hurried up the stairs and a hand came around my bedroom door. I was at the point of passing out as the man's face appeared. How soon and how much everything changed. In an instant, I yelled and cried at him as I jumped into his arms. Paul, you're home. We both sat on the bed and tears as he struggled to find his words to explain his return. He explained all about the shelling they came under, his time in the army hospital with Reg, who happened to be both my neighbor and my best friend Meg's husband. Paul explained the shrapnel in his arms and back, his discharge from service, and how Reg should soon be discharged as well. Soon thereafter he retired to bed without so much as a bite to eat. I suspected he was merely exhausted. I slept soundly. That night Paul was up and dressed when I woke the next morning. He said he had no time for breakfast as he was off to the post office to resume his duties as postmaster. I found this unusual. However, I didn't say a word, as I was simply happy to have him home and imagined he was adjusting back to life at home. Paul was scarcely gone for 2 hours before he returned with a huge sack of letters, which he promptly dumped on the kitchen table. He sat sorting the correspondence for an hour or so, and I couldn't help but notice that he had placed roughly 2 dozen pieces of mail in the small iron waste bucket we kept next to the stove. Upon noticing my curiosity, Paul explained they were rubbish and I was to burn them. Then, why, a harshness that I have never heard in his voice, he told me not to open or read a single one. They were to be destroyed and nothing more. After he had made his demands known, he left on his rounds the minute he was out of sight. I grabbed the letters in the iron bin and did as I was told, burning them in the stove one by one. After the 5th letter, however, I began to notice a pattern. All of the letters were addressed to women in our village or to those in neighboring towns, and they all had the army seal on them. I was puzzled by this, but my general sign gave way to horror as I came upon the 8th letter. It was addressed to me. Shaking and losing more of my composure with each passing second, I opened the letter and began to read. It was an official letter to me offering condolences and informing me that Paul, along with his company, had been killed in action. Foolishly, I cast the letter into the stove, destroying it. After a few moments of nonsensical weeping, I looked through the other letters. The final piece of mail was addressed to my neighbor Meg. Paul came home later that evening. For the 2nd night in a row, he refused to eat. At that moment I began to realize that not only had I not seen him eat or drink since he had been home, but I had not seen him sleep either. Moments later, Paul interrupted my reverie, asking me coldly if I had destroyed the letters as asked. I nodded to say yes. After all, it was nearly true. I had destroyed all the letters, all of them but one, the one addressed to Meg. That night in bed, though my eyes were closed, I could feel Paul staring at me. He stared for hours. When he eventually rose from bed some time after midnight, I imagined it was because he Washington certain I had fallen asleep. I strained my ears. I could hear him downstairs speaking aloud in a strange voice. It was Paul, but it wasn't, and it was not English he was speaking, or any other language I recognized. The next morning I woke to find Paul the same before, dressed, refusing breakfast, and on his way to work. But that day I had a plan. If I could used to get to Meg and show her the letter, the two of us could think of a way out of that hell. I was close to losing my composure again as I knocked firmly upon Meg's door. She answered the door, smiling broadly from ear to ear. Before I could break down, show her the letter, and explain what had happened, she spoke 5 little words. Reg came home last night, and with those little odds, she crushed any hope I had of escaping that nightmare. Fighting the knots in my stomach, I managed to ask Meg where Reg was, and she told me that he had accompanied Paul to the county post sorting office to accept a nice new job. This all happened 3 months ago. Since then, dozens of men have come home without exception, and thanks to my Paul, all of them have been given jobs with the post office and other communication services. When I lay in bed at night now, I shiver and jump. The noises of the house no longer scare me, but when my husband passes our house during his postal route, my blood runs cold. Context: it's a strange thing. Story 6, The Spirit of Devil's Curb. This story happened when I was about 13 years old. It was a hot summer afternoon, and my buddy and I were bored and looking for something to do. For the purposes of this story, I will refer to my friend as Hank. Hank's older brother heard us talking about how bored we were and suggested that we go down to the river bottoms and check out the area where the devil worshippers hung out, just to creep ourselves out. I had heard my older brother talk about some blood cult or devil worshippers hanging around the river bottoms as well. So when Hank's older brother mentioned this to us, my interest was piqued. Being young and stupid, Hank and I were always interested in things that were scary, especially if it involved local gossip. So we decided to go. It also helped to ease our fears knowing that it was still light outside and would remain light for a few more hours because it was the summertime. According to Hank's older brother, the devil worshippers only came out at night. So we should be safe, I told Hank. At the time, the town that I lived in was small and the river bottoms only had a few isolated houses that were separated by several acres of farmland. So there really wasn't a lot down there, and my expectations for finding anything interesting were as Hank and I made our way down the road that led to the hill nicknamed Devil's Curb. We talked lightly about the things that our older brothers had said about the devil worshipper. Yes, we both believe that a bunch of weirdos probably went and did drugs and some other stupid stuff, but neither of us thought the animal or human sacrifice were some of the events that occurred down there. Our plan was to walk down Devil's Curb, investigate a few areas in the river bottoms, and then return home before it got dark. However, we were not prepared for the things that we will see as we approach Devil's Curb. Hank and I noticed a foul stench in the air. It smelled like something rotting. It kind of reminded me of the smell of a dead deer when I will go deer hunting. It wasn't incredibly potent, and it was common for deer to come down from the nearby mountains and become roadkill. So the smell of a dead deer did not seem to out of place. For the sake of the story, it's important that I give you a brief physical layout description of Devil's Curb. It is a paved road with a switchback hill that if you start at the top you'll find yourself going straight down in a southern direction and then tightly turning into a westward direction. Then, after traveling about 30 feet, you will make another tight turn that faces you in a southeasterly direction, and you will go another 15 feet until you are in the river bottoms. Now that you have that imagery, I will continue. Hank and I found the source of the smell, which indeed was a dead deer laying off the side of the road before the first switchback that turns you toward the west. Again, this would normally not be of any concern. However, the deer had a thick rope around its neck. It had been gutted, and its legs were missing. At first, I just thought that it was some unethical hunters, and it may have been, but then Hank and I noticed all of the other dead animals surrounding the area. A dead raccoon, several dead squirrels, a few dead cats, and what looked to be like the rotting corpse of a very large dog. That one upset me the most. There were things that were out of place, such as an old record player, a blood-stained pulpit, several knives and hatchets, and a few pestles and mortar lying around. This should have been enough warning for us to go back home, but again, we were young and stupid, so we didn't. Instead, we kept to our plan and continued down Devil's Curb to the west. As we descended, the hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and I was anxious to know what else we would find before the road switched back to the southeastern direction that led to the river bottoms. Hank and I again walked off the road and into a small, secluded section that overlooked most of the farmland in the river bottoms to the east, south, and west of us. There was a 20-foot ascending cliff to our backs that rose up to the same elevation before you begin walking down Devil's Curb. Again, there was a serious stench in the air that reminded both of us of rotting flesh. However, this time the smell Washington as overwhelming and made both of us nauseous to the point that we became dizzy and nearly vomited. However, what caused us the most horror was what we found lying at our feet. There were several tarps rolled hot dog style, with something rolled up inside of them. This was undoubtedly where the source of the smell was coming from. After discovering the tarps, Hank and I immediately looked at each other. Hank's face was pale, and I saw absolute terror on his face. I began to feel like someone was watching us, and when I told Hank this, he started nodding his head frantically, and then loudly whispered, "Erd, I know, I feel it too." Before either of us discussed this matter any more or even thought about doing something asinine like opening up the tarps to peer inside, I began sprinting back up Devil's Curb with Hank following closely at my heels. Once we reached the top of the hill, I continued dashing in the direction of home. I heard Hank screaming after me, telling me to stop, so I slowed down. But I was afraid to turn around and see what was the matter. That's when Hank grabbed my shoulder and forced me to turn around. "Look over there," Hank shrilled, pointing next to the top of Devil's Curb. When I looked in that direction, I saw what Hank was pointing at. Standing about a football field length away from us was a woman in a white wedding dress, staring directly at us again. There were no houses anywhere nearby, no cars, and no streets other than the one that Hank and I were standing on. No explanation as to why a woman would be standing in the middle of nowhere, wearing a wedding dress alone. However, the worst part is that she was standing looking over that 20-foot cliff, exactly where Hank and were when we saw the tarps. I knew at that moment that she had been watching us. But for how long, and why, and what was she doing? Why was she there? We were close enough to her that we could see that her stare was fixed on us, but we were too far away to determine any facial features or if she was smiling or glaring. We stopped running and continued to walk back home, suspiciously looking over our shoulders every few seconds to see if she was still there. She was, and she was, staring at us until we were out of view. The nausea and dizziness Hank and I felt gradually went away until we returned to his house. We both agreed to not tell our parents for fear of getting in trouble. That night I kept dreaming of going to Devil's Curb and looking around the area. I just couldn't seem to get it out of my head. It was a little bit past 3 a.m. when I was awakened by something. It wasn't a noise. I just felt like someone was close by, and I had always been a light sleeper. Then I looked down at the foot of my bed and saw her, the lady in the white wedding dress. She was hovering or levitating, and once again staring directly at me. My blinds were open, so the full moon shone in my room, lighting it up enough for me to see her, except I couldn't see her face. I could only tell that she was glaring or scowling at me. I wasn't quite sure. Maybe she was mad that I had been at Devil's Curb and found something that I shouldn't have. Maybe she just hated punk teenage boys, or maybe I have no idea. All I know is that as she levitated at the foot of my bed, I couldn't move. The fear was so powerful that I thought that I would pass out or die. I decided to close my eyes, and somehow I was able to throw the sheets over my head. I was hoping that I would fall asleep and that she would leave me alone, but all I could envision was her staring at me, peering deep into my soul with a menacing and hateful expression. It felt like an eternity, but eventually daylight crept in through my window as the sun began to rise just a little before 6 a.m. I slowly pulled the sheets from over my head, half expecting her to still be there, but she wasn't. As I looked around, there was no one in my room. I never saw the lady in the white wedding dress again, and I hope that I never do. I have told a few people about this experience, and nobody can give me a good explanation as to why she would be standing where she was, alone, and in a white wedding dress. I don't know if she had any sinister intentions, but I'm glad that nothing bad happened to Hank or me. I also don't know if it was just a bad dream when I saw her levitating at the foot of my bed, or if it really happened. Either way, I learned that it's best that you stay away from things that are evil, even if you're young and stupid. Story 7. The two-headed boy watching TV has always been one of our favorite things to do. In the early years, this proved difficult. Remus, being the stronger of our halves, would pull me until the remote was always within reach of his arm and out of that of mine. I didn't usually mind, though, and eventually Mom saved up enough from her job waitressing at the local American-style diner called Frank's to buy a second TV. From then on, it didn't matter who sat closest to the remote. Remus liked to watch those old slapstick movies, Laurel and Hardy, Charlie Chaplin, and all that falling over stuff. His favorite was a 1930s film called Blockheads, about Stan learning the conveniences of the modern world. He laughed maniacally again and again as he hit rewind on the remote to watch the whole thing over. I can't stand that movie, but hearing Remus laugh was nice. When your brother can't speak, it's sometimes hard to can how he's feeling, but when he's laughing, I know he's happy. We were born on the 7th of July, 1994, by emergency C-section. It hadn't been a surprise when we came out. The doctors had already informed my mother of our condition, which they had picked up, to the delight of the medical world, via ultrasound. Woman gives birth to two-headed boy. The headline in the local newspaper, the Colchester Gazette, had read, "We spent the first 2 years of our life in hospital before we were allowed to move into a council-owned flat near my mother's parents." I have no real memory of any of this, but would tell us how people from all over the world would come to the hospital and even knock on the flat door to get a look at us. My earliest memories of going to school for the first time. Mom helped us into the classroom and sat us both down on a seat near the front of the class before placing a kiss on each of our heads and leaving. Mrs. Neer, the reception class teacher, then made each of the children stand up and say their name. When it was our turn, Remus hadn't wanted to stand. I can only guess this is because he knew he wouldn't be able to say his own nom. With my right arm pushing on the table, I tried to get us to stand up, but Remus wasn't moving, and he pinched my thigh from out of sight. "It's okay, dear," Mrs. Neer had said softly from where she sat behind her desk. "What are your names?" "Hello, I'm Romulus, and this is my brother Remus," with an almighty thump. Remus smashed his hand into the table, and the rest of the class erupted into giggle. Yes, Remus looked side to side, glaring at the room, and before I had a chance to tell him it was going to be okay, he had taken our body from where we sat and was dragging my half of ourselves across the classroom to the door. Things calmed down. After that incident, the other children weren't kind, and never would they wish to play with us. But that didn't bother Remus and me. We had each other, and that was enough. Another memory I have is when Mom would take us swimming at the outdoor swimming pool in Bridlingsea. Looking back on it now, I'm sure there were those who were skeptical about our ability to swim. But as it turned out, we loved it, and when my brother and I want the same thing, we were almost able to read what the other was thinking, and to the astonishment of the swimmers, we would race up and down the pool, doing lap after lap. However, the memory which stands out most from those swimming trips was a game of lifesaver. This was a game where we would sink to the bottom of the pool, and then, taking turns, one of us would swim the other to the surface. I wasn't strong enough to get myself and Remus to the surface, so when it was my turn, Remus would kick with his leg to help. One day we were playing the game, and it was my turn to swim us to the surface. Down we sank, our arms by our sides as we submerged into the deep end. I could feel the pressure in my ears as we hit the bottom of the pool. We sat there for a moment, looking up at the strange twinkling the sun makes upon the water when my breath was close to running out. I raised my arm and made a stroke towards the surface. We bobbed a foot or so off the bottom, and with my left leg I kicked out, pushing ourselves off the tile pool bed. But we didn't move. My lungs were starting to hurt now, and I knew we needed to get out from under the water. I looked to Remus, and he stared back with a huge grin upon his face. I glared at him and frantically kicked out and swept my arm through the water to try and get to the surface. Remus didn't move. He just smiled at me. The next thing I remember is waking up as a lifeguard breathed into my mouth. The taste of chlorine was strong, and it gargled in the back of my throat before I vomited. The lifeguard, a young man in his late teens, looked at us in disgust and rushed away into the bathroom. I have never forgotten that moment. It wasn't long after this moment that we discovered masturbation. We knew about sex. Who didn't in this day and age? But masturbation was something completely foreign to us. I mean, sure, we had woken up with a stiff dick for months now, but none of us had mentioned it in any sort of way. We had overheard Sean Hart, a boy in our 9th grade class, whispering about it to some other boys at the back of our science class. Give it a good tug, were his words, and a few nights later, we did. Mom was working the late shift at Frank's, where she was now a supervisor. Remus and I were watching a film called The Girl Next Door, the one with that hot blonde, Elisha Cuthbert. Well, it had just got to the scene when Elisha is taking her top off and is about to jump into a swimming pool when I felt Remus's hand slip into our jeans. The next 5 minutes were strange. It was an odd sensation, and one which seemed to almost never get started. But once it it was all over far too soon. This started a spell of steady morning masturbation. I never started it, but Remus would reach down and do the deed just after we woke up every day. I never spoke about it, and sometimes I'd pretend to still be asleep as he did it. but I never complained. It remained entirely consensual. When we were 17, we made our first friend, Christopher Hughes, whose family moved in next door in the winter of 2011. Chris was unlike the other teenagers we had met. He never looked at us with pity, nor did he seem afraid of or put off by our appearance. He'd often come round and watch TV with both of us. Remus liked him, too, and would hold his hand, and they would both cheer as they watched that scene where Chaplin is roller skating. I liked Chris, too. We would talk about the Ainsworth girls who lived around the corner from us, and how we'd both like to know how they looked under the matching blouses they'd often wear. Remus didn't like this, however. He'd pinch me whenever the subject came up and would grab Chris's hand. The masturbation continued, where Remus was pumping up to 4 or 5 times a day. Whenever he could get a free moment away from Mom, he had become addicted to it, and even when our dick hurt, he couldn't help himself. I liked it, too. In 2012, we turned 18, and Mum held a party. Even one of the doctors who had been at our birth came and congratulated us. A few of the older ladies who worked at Frank's came and brought presents, mostly DVDs of old movies, probably based on Mum's suggestions. The only real friend of ours who turned up was Chris. As soon as the door opened, Remus dragged me over to him and embraced him in the hallway. Eventually, we sat down, blew out the candles on tea cake, which is much easier with 2 heads, and said goodbye to our guests. I watched as Chris spoke to my mother in the kitchen about something. She nodded, and he ran over to where we were sitting. Boys, he began, and cleared his throat. Men, I have something to show you. We followed Chris outside, and on his driveway next to ours was a car. It wasn't anything fancy, a bright red Fiesta with a dent in the driver's side door. My new rye. He held open his arms as we took in the spectacle. Remus grunted in excitement. How about we take her for a spin? Remus looked at me, and I looked at Mom, who was watching from the front door. She nodded, and before I had time to turn my head back, Remus was climbing into the passenger side front seat. We cruised along the mostly empty streets out of the town and to a local reservoir, where we finally got out and sat on the hood of the car talking about the night here. Chris said, I have something to show you. He jumped off the hood of the car and fuddled about for something in the back seat, and then pulled it out. A bra, I laughed. Where did you get that from? I demanded. To know Amy Ainsworth. Chris stated proudly. Did you? I asked, desperate to know. Twice, he said, and threw the bra at us as he jumped back onto the hood of the car. What happened? Next changed my life forever. Remus lifted his hand and grabbed onto the back of Chris's head, clumps of hair sticking out between his strong fingers. We stood up, and in one violent motion, he slammed Chris's head into the hood of the car. I didn't say anything. I was completely stunned. Again, Remus lifted Chris's head and smashed it into the red metal. Thump. Over and over he did this until Chris's head was nothing more than a mashed, bloody mess. Eventually, Remus let go. Chris was laying bent over the car's front, not moving, not making any sound at all. What the fuck have you done? I muttered, and then screamed. Nitrogen monoxide. Remus. A fist came flying from the side of me and smashed into my face, dazing me. My eyes watered so I couldn't see what was happening. I don't remember walking back to town or climbing into bed, but that's where I awoke. Immediately I could tell something was different. I looked over to Remus, but I didn't see his scruff of black, curly hair. I saw plastic, white and glossy. Remus. There was no reply. I moved my hand where he should be and felt it. The plastic of the bag which was tied around his head. With one hand I tore at the bag, ripping it apart and unveiling the stiff, pale face of my brother, his mouth still gaping from his final gasp for life. 3 weeks later, and I'm still being held by the Essex County Police. But it's unlikely I will go to prison. It's similarly unlikely I will survive much longer. The doctors say it's a miracle I have so far. I tried to tell them it wasn't me, that it was Remus. But nobody listened, not even Mum, who has apparently left Colchester to live with her sister up north. For the first time since I was born, I am alone. And in an odd way, I am at peace. The nurse turns the TV on, and it's playing Blockheads. I watch it for a minute, and in the back of my mind I remember how Remus would laugh, and I smile. I lay there, handcuffed to THE bed, and watch for a few moments longer. Then I rest my head upon Remus and close my eyes.